Blench here, talking about the reconstruction of traps and trapping in Austroasiatic. So, as most of you all know, there's a broad association between the Southeast Asian Neolithic and the expansion of Austroasiatic. Reconstructions for Proto-Austroasiatic depict a farming society which had continuing dependence on hunting and aquatic resources to support this association. So material culture in Southeast Asia is quite conservative. Many forms or items, whether baskets or pots or so on, have remained widespread across the region up to the present, reflecting this initial expansion. Other researchers, like Mark Alvarez, for example, who has looked at bladed tools, who looked at ceramics, house types, which suggests that we can reconstruct terms for material culture as well as patterns of early borrowing. Presentation looks at traps and trapping, since these are very much in use in the present, but are almost completely absent in the archaeological record. Okay, here's to just remind you of the distribution of Austroasiatic. Obviously, the core areas here in the Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos area, the ASEAN languages down here, the Nicobar Islands, and of course the Munda languages here. So, interesting pattern of dispersal, which I've talked about elsewhere, is my personal reconstruction of the expansion. In other words, I'm proposing a core area somewhere in North Vietnam, and then a series of expansions leading to the growths that we see today. Now, traps, that is both fish traps and animal traps. I'm afraid the ethnographic and lexicographic literature on traps is a bit weak. One of the great counterexamples is the Svenson Yuan dictionary, which has excellent lexical data, but also diagrams of how the traps work. But quite a few museum collections across the region do have traps in them, and I'd just like to acknowledge the Tribal Museum in Bhubaneswar, Meghalaya, the Don Bosco, Vientiane, the National Museum, Luang Prabang, Tayak, Chiang Mai Hill Tribes Museum, Phnom Penh, Siem Reap, Hanoi, Ho Chi Minh City, and a variety of, especially in Vietnam, provincial museums. Typical traps are still in use in many areas, although the rise of industrial technologies, in particular guns and poisons for fish, have changed the situation dramatically in some areas. It's very striking that despite the immense diversity of regional types, some characteristic traps appear almost unchanged across the region. So the archaeological evidence for traps and trapping is extremely weak, but synchronic ethnography can provide distributional evidence. So the core of the paper is lexical evidence for both the verbs associated with trapping, animal and fish traps, also bird traps. It presents a series of what I would call quasi-reconstructions based on the lexical evidence, and where possible ties these to particular types of trap. In some areas, the application of the term is quite precise, for example, the spring trap for rodents, but in other words, in other areas, there's a generalized term for trap, found with a broad spectrum of definitions. The reconstructions, or comparanda, as probably Paul would say, reflect close contact between core branches of Austroasiatic in the Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia area. Outlier branches, such as Munda, Nicobaric, almost never show cognates. So prior to the spread of farming, fisheries and hunting were key subsistence strategies alongside gathering. In pre-agricultural times, hunter-gatherers depended heavily on catching wild animals, predominantly mammals and large reptiles. These could be speared or shot with arrows, but most were trapped. In areas where rivers were abundant, such as in much of mainland Southeast Asia, traps for fish and other aquatic fauna, such as crustaceans and frogs, were also highly elaborated. Insects were also widely eaten, and cricket traps are found across the region. Our understanding of the significance of different types of traps is thus strongly dependent on the comparative ethnographic record, and where possible, lexical evidence. Authors of dictionary are not always very specific about the morphology of traps or the animal species that they were intended to catch. So, as a term, I'm going to go now through the actual tables of detailed evidence. I begin each table with evidence from Austroasiatic languages, but it seems to me, as I found with baskets, that there's frequently borrowing into trans-Himalayan languages. I believe all of these items originated with Austroasiatic because their attestation in trans-Himalayans is often very, very patchy. So the first one is a verb to set a trap, and all the Austroasiatic evidence is indeed pretty much verbs. But when it turns up in trans-Himalayan, it's very often the noun, actual name for a trap, rather than a verb to trap. As a second term for to set a trap, this is one of those that appears in Shorto, something like duck. Mostly it's a verb, but for example, in Aslan it shows up as a physical trap, and also in Bimeric. But pretty clear that this is some sort of small animal trap, but we don't know what. It doesn't refer to fish or birds. Here's one of the most widespread and well attested traps. This is almost certainly the spring trap for rodents. Just to flick back to the next, this is the diagram from the Hu Yuan dictionary, and it shows how the rodent spring trap looks and how it works. And the rodent is attracted to a bait, and then it's captured by a sprung trap. So this is, as I say, pretty widely attested, and rarely it actually appears to have a Nicobarric cognate and also a Mangic cognate, although in both those cases it's a bird trap. But everywhere else where it's defined, it appears to be a rat trap, and people who are familiar with the area know that trapping rodents is quite a common deal. Now, this is rather puzzling. This also appears to be a word for rodent trap. It looks pretty similar to the spring trap, but each case it has this particular formula with the schwa, or the central vowel. I'm not quite sure why these two look so similar. I think they must ultimately be the same root, but they somehow diverged in the past. Right, this is fish trap. So these are rather diverse. One of them refers to a physical fish trap. Another refers to a fish fence, and the two others are the verb itself. But my guess is that this was originally a fish fence, because fish fences are extremely common throughout the entire region. Okay, another different term for fish trap. Pretty scattered meanings. I mean, at one point, it means a fish trap. It's a verb. But in Monic, for example, it's a deadfall trap. That's a trap for small animals. In Chong, we can't, it just says piège, so that should be an animal trap. And in Vietic, it turns out to be a frog trap. So it's pretty hard to know if this was originally a fish trap and moved to other types of meaning. Another word for fish trap, ton. So this looks like it started as a fish trap, but then becomes a verb, or possibly it's so hard to tell which way around these things go. Certainly, by the time it moves into Trans-Himalayan languages, it's entirely an animal trap. So I guess we've seen this before. Something that starts out as one type of trap turns into another trap when it gets burrowed into Trans-Himalayan. Okay, so here's a probable term for bird trap. It's not very well attested, and as you can see, the forms are a bit poorly. I mean, it's possible. It's just coincidence. You have the Katuic term, which looks like a bird trap, but also fascinatingly and rather strikingly, it is attested in a Munda language, Korku, a trap to catch wild fowl. So I'm only floating this one as a possibility, but this is a very rare case when we actually have a Munda cognate. So just to give you some actual pictures of what some of these traps look like, here is a cricket trap. Now, cricket traps, sadly, although they're extremely widespread across the region, we don't have any lexical evidence which would allow us to reconstruct them. So I think we have to assume that they are reconstructable, but it's not on lexical evidence. We have a bird trap from Northeast India, and we have another type of rodent trap from the Klu Yuan, which again you can see it. So what I really want to say is that the ethnography has a huge diversity of traps. I believe if we had much better dictionaries, then we'll be able to reconstruct a great deal more than we can at the moment. Okay, sort of winding up here a bit. Fishing creels, that is creels where you store fish when you catch them in the river and so on. So these are wonderful items. They are they all have the same function, right? But they have extremely diverse forms across the region. Here's just a couple of pictures, one from the National Museum of Ethnology in Hanoi, and one from the Khasi people in Shillong. So my guess is that if we had better data, we would be able to reconstruct fishing creel, but so far haven't got any evidence. But it's there in the material culture, put it that way. Okay, so just to bring this to a conclusion, the Austroasiatic languages dispersed from the Southeast Asian mainland around 4,000 years ago, with a highly distinctive material culture already in place. However, it's likely that many hunting and fishing traps existed even prior to the primary expansion of Austroasiatic. So the paper uses a combination of comparative linguistics and synchronic material culture to reconstruct a preliminary inventory of basketry traps. Sorry, you got that wrong. Basketry traps known to Austroasiatic speakers. As Austroasiatic spread, some particular types spread with their names. In some cases, the referent is conservative. In other glosses, the noun for specific trap exchanges with generalized verbs to trap or to set trap. There are several types of trap across the Austroasiatic world which are not sufficiently well defined to be reconstructible. For example, cricket traps and the fishing creel. We may hope that in future refined lexical data may improve the situation. Now, really what I'm sort of doing, and with other related presentations, is to say we can bring to life the material world of life some 4,000 years ago with a much greater richness can be achieved by archaeology alone, because so many of these things are so physically similar in widely different places, and yet they don't remain in the archaeological record because they're almost entirely made of vegetable materials. Okay, so thanks to many researchers who made available documents and unpublished materials over the years, but especially Paul Sidwell. Thanks to the many museums and their collections, above all in North Vietnam and Northeast India, which made this talk possible. And just to show you in the picture, this is the Don Bosco Museum in Shillong in Meghalaya, which has the biggest collection of quasi material and is generally a very impressive place for understanding Northeast India.
Okay, I think that's the end of it.
Okay, thank you very much, Roger, for this presentation. Now we can take questions from the public. Does anyone have questions or comments? Yeah, Paul has raised his hand.
Yes, Roger, I wanted to just remark on that GIEP form. You had a couple of Binaric and Katuic reflexes for that. Actually, I think that's part of a word family for a sound symbolic form, GIEP and GIEP, which means something like to snatch or snip or grab with tongs, that kind of action. And I think that word family also extends through the Dai languages. So I think there's probably a lot of rich pickings there with that one, rather than just the few isolated forms you showed today.
So wait a minute, you're suggesting that I look into the broader verb about snatch, grab or something like that, and that these are realizations of it for a trap, and that also there could be cognates of the verb in Daic. Is getting that right?
Yes, that's right. I think you've just grabbed a small sample of actually a bigger sound symbolic form, which you can imagine the idea of an expressive form that means to grab or snatch or snip, getting into trap lexicon, quite easily, because that form broadly is quite well represented, actually, I think.
Yes. Okay. Do you think that? I see Ryan's put up a question about the bite root as well. Do you think that that's connected with the cap root?
Well, I think it's a separate root, but the word shape, this starting with a velar and ending with a labial, has a strong sound symbolic quality of snatching, grabbing in the area. So I think you have to reconstruct two separate words, but you can argue that they share a sound symbolic quality.
Right. But would you connect the cap root for bite as well?
Well, I think you have to reconstruct two separate etema.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
But the connection is at a deeper level of sound symbolism.
Right. Well, I will investigate this in. I've written the paper, but I can revise the take this into account and revise my thoughts in this area for sure. Yes.
Yeah. I think you'd find rich pickings for extending your set of comparanda if you take a broader sound symbolic approach.
No. Point taken. Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah, you see the there's comment from Lynette in the chat.
Yeah. Who put that up? Sorry. Let's see.
She commented kiap means catch or grab, and kniap grabbing instrument in Khmer. And Hiram commented that kem is catch in Pnar. Do we have other questions or comments?
Yes, I'm just typing a question myself.
Okay, sure, go ahead. So Roger asked, do people connect any other comparisons with verbs of this type? What
If I
do you
can
mean
chip in
by this?
again, sorry. Yeah, look, Roger, I will personally go through the video again and give you some feedback, some direct feedback to help you write, perhaps rewrite. Okay.
Yes, great. That's really interesting. I hadn't really thought of this aspect of it, but that would expand the connection. Also, I really, I mean, all the people in this call, you know, have a lot of sort of experience of different areas of the Austroasiatic zone. So I'd be really interested if anybody has photographs or traps or names and so on, because the real problem is that, you know, most of the dictionaries are very weak on identificational detail, so you just get, you know, rather vague stuff. But I believe languages are actually pretty precise, as you see with Yuan. So it's more a matter of getting more precise data, and then I think the comparisons will we can expand them. Also, I haven't really looked through the Thai literature, but it's possible there are more comparisons to be had there, as I certainly found with baskets. So anybody with knowledge of those comparisons too would be of interest.
Ryan comments, wonderful collection of comparanda, Roger. Thanks for compiling this. What would be your top items that should be included in our primary data collection word list going forward? Outsiders like myself, being unfamiliar with this kind of material, culture, have a hard time eliciting these things and glossing them correctly.
Well, you know, the thing to do is particularly to go to museums. I mean, these traps are aesthetically really wonderful. I mean, I have some wonderful fish traps from northern Thailand, which are really like sculptures. They're so beautifully made, and as a result, museums do have very good collections of these things. So you can, if you go to them, you can actually see what I'm talking about in much more detail. I mean, the Don Bosco Museum in Meghalaya, which some of you will know at least, has this amazing display of fish traps from the whole area there. So, and the Guwahati Museum as well. So you get an idea. Of course, you can't. I mean, one thing that is widespread across the whole region is the pit trap for large animals. So you dig a big hole in the ground, you put spikes up at the bottom, and then you cover it with grass and so on. So the animal's walking along the jungle trail and it walks in and falls into the pit trap and so on. This is unfortunately a method which sometimes catches tigers, which are normally not something you want to catch in these traps, but it's intended to catch antelopes and things like that. But they're found everywhere in the core area of Austroasiatic, so that there must be, if we had the data, a better, better reconstruction possible, I believe. But we just don't have the lexical evidence at the moment. But they are very wonderful items. Is all I can say. Just in terms of understanding early subsistence and just as examples of the ingenuity of these populations. So I do urge you to go and look at these in museums, and you'll get a better idea of what you can collect and so on.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions or comments? Okay, it seems like we don't have any questions anymore, so we can thank our speaker one more time. Thank you, Roger, for this very interesting talk. I personally will try to, elicit more of these words doing field work on Khmuic languages about traps and the like. I hope to get.
Well, in that case, you can see drawings of all the main traps in the Svantisson dictionary.
Yeah.
So if you have data in other Khmuic languages, that'd be just great. That would be that's easier to do than some other branches. I mean, trying to look for stuff on Nicobaric, it's pathetic, frankly. I mean, maybe Nicobaric would have more if we had better data.
Right.
Could I chip in something on that topic?
Yeah,
yes.
Sure.
So I'm sure Roger would be very interested to know. Hang on, I'll just get the video working. Right. So Anvita Abi has just sent me these books. So there are now 4 new books documenting Nicobarese languages, and they include dictionaries of Sanayo and Luro, which I believe are Teresa and Bambuka in the old terminology. And these are actually quite extensively illustrated with color pictures, which include a huge amount of ethnographic information, including, fishing and hunting and so forth, basket weaving, all sorts of stuff. So we actually do now have some rich resource for this kind of study with.
Right. Now, that's interesting, because I have an early version of these which doesn't have pictures.
Yes.
But so I'll be very interested to see these physical copies or electronic copies with pictures.
Well, I only have the physical. Sorry, I only have the physical copies. She wouldn't share electronic copies, but Anvita was very, very kind to send the physical copies, and I'm quite sure she would send them to you if you asked directly.
Okay, that's great. I'll follow up on that one. Thanks for that information.
And it also includes two grammatical sketches of the languages, which again is tremendously valuable for my grammatical research project on Nicobarese. So thank you to Anvita again, and I recommend these volumes. They're not perfect, but they're highly informative.
Good. That's really, as I say, I've got a version of these that doesn't have pictures. So pictures are pretty essential in doing this. So let's see if we can find more. Great. Thanks, Paul.
Okay. Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Roger.